Здравствуйте, товарищи! Welcome to a new video. In this video, I will be talking about my Cold War 1960s Soviet kit. I hope you enjoy. Before getting started, I must say that I'm sorry for the background noises you might be hearing in the video. The construction workers are still working and I need to make a video, so we'll have to put up with it. Well, the basic kits. Obviously, during the 1950s and 60s, right after the Second World War, the Soviets decided, you know what, we're just going to keep using the same uniform. Maybe just update some small things, such as adding extra pockets for enlisted men, and try to make them from some type of different materials, at least for the gimnasturkas. Aside from that, pretty much everything stayed the same. Right up until 1969, where they issued a new uniform, but still, regardless, from 1945 to 1969, the Soviet infantrymen pretty much wore the same uniform, almost the same uniform, that was issued to their counterpart in the Great Patriotic War, or the Second World War. So, obviously, we're going to be starting with the Pilotka. If you guys watch my new video, if you guys watch my old video about the post-war Pilotkas and comparing them to Schuster's reproduction, you know that they're pretty much identical to wartime ones, material-wise, cut-wise, insignia-wise. I briefly talked about the star I had on it is for 1950s and early 60s. Later on, the 60s, you see the aluminium metal ones being issued. You see them quite common in Czechoslovakia especially, but this is pretty much the one I have on here is the wartime style enameled star that I have. Obviously, the way the Pilotkas are also worn sometimes changes. Wartime, you don't really see them in the middle of top of the head, but during the 60s you do see that happening. Obviously, a still slight jaunty angle is still acceptable, and it is something that I quite actually like. Well, sometimes more than that, actually, you know, that happens sometimes at events, but still, I digress. The uniform, the 1947/1958 gimnasturka is obviously, as the name suggests, is the updated version of the 1947 gimnasturka, which was different from the 1943 simply because of the added extra pockets for the enlisted men. We talked about this when I made the video about do's and don'ts with Soviet reenacting, where enlisted men did not wear gimnasturkas with pockets. It was just an officer thing. From 1947 onwards, it was for everyone. Everyone had pockets. Well, aside from that, obviously the material is different than the wartime ones, but still, it is quite similar. The pogoni also do change with the new regulations after 1955, I believe. They remove piping from pogoni and collar tabs of the greatcoats, which is a shame because I really like the piping, but what can you do? Obviously, from the 1950s and 60s, you see quite sure the raspberry slash kind of like crimson red type of shoulder boards being issued, but most of the time they're actually used with field sights on in the 1960s. In the 1950s, it's quite common to see the other side, but my impression is mostly a 1960s one, hence the uniform obviously being a 1960s made production. Aside from that, quite interestingly found thing is what I noticed is the buttons being used on the gimnasturka is actually identical to wartime ones, simply because of the correct green paint on them, which was the paint that was used on wartime ones. Most reproductions these days either use the later post-war production ones, such as these brownish ones. You can probably see the color difference, kinda, not exactly, but you can probably tell. One is more brownish, the other one is more correct green. The most important part of the kit obviously is the belt, which was a new introduction from 1947. You see these being used. Obviously the older version, the one I have is the updated 1956 onwards model that was pretty much used until 1991, the belt buckle that is. But luckily it has the nice high quality 1960s made leather on it. The 1970s and 80s started to have a less higher quality production of leather, I'm afraid, so they're not as nice as these ones. So for a 1960s, late 50s and 60s impression, these are perfect, as well as obviously 1970s and 80s, because why not? Why wouldn't you want to use something that's, you know, the belt buckle is correct, why not use the nice leather? Am I right? So you see these also being used in the 70s as well, so that is something that can be done. Anyways, obviously the important thing I stepped out of, forgot to tell you guys about the, you know, the color liner, which is obviously something that is supposed to be the most Soviet / post-Soviet kit of any uniform with that was related to the Soviets. Even with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, you see countries that or ex-members of the Soviet Union still using color liners in their uniforms up until the 1990s, even early 2000s. I know Azerbaijan sometimes used to use them, could be until the early early 2000s. So it is quite something that's important when you're doing Soviet. So never forget, never. Well, obviously I can't really show you guys right now, but there's going to be probably an insert right around here. I am wearing the shalavari or the breeches, which are again identical to the Second World War pattern, albeit perhaps a little bit smaller on the sides with the, you know, the sheer girth of the shalavari, but the fabric that's been used is the same double twill cotton fabric that is seen on Pilotkas as well. So these are correct for wartime use as well. Sadly, I am wearing my 1970s sapogi, which are not correct for this period. Until 1970 pretty much, the Soviet boots would have been using the wartime style dot soles, which I am looking forward to get one for Second World War reenacting, but also would be a fine addition to my 1960s kit. So those are the things that I'm looking for at the moment. Also, one thing that we should be noticing about is the grey coat that was used. Obviously, the model is quite similar to the 1943 OBR 1943 model, which is quite different than the OBR 35 chignon, which I have two, one for early war, one for mid-war and late war. But then again, perhaps for a photo shoot or a basic impression when I'm cold, if nobody notices the pointy cuffs with the correct collar tabs and shoulder boards, perhaps that can be used. But I would not recommend it, because simply for the fact that that is not exactly correct. So I wouldn't usually. I would do it if I was desperate, but I'm not. I could definitely find a post-war model grey coat eventually, so that would be good to have. Well, aside from that, I must say, obviously the combat kit is supposed to be for the AKM in the 1960s and previously Type 3, Type 2 AKs in the 50s. But I do have the vice straps for it, 1960s, but I need to get the metal belt buckle with the canvas strap on it. It's for combat issues. In the 1960s, they used the darker fabric for the AK magazine pouches as well as the grenade pouches, so that's something that I need to be getting. I do have an AKM pouch, that's the 1950s made one, so that is good. I do have white straps, but there are small things such as the canteen and the not the Pilatka, but the veshmashok, that is quite different than the 1970s. So those things need to be gotten. You know, I need to get those. So that will be good. One thing that I should also add is I need to get motorized infantry, motor infantry pins on my shoulder boards, which are, I can use the 1970s ones for 1968, but I would like to do general 1960s, so I think it would be better for me to get an actual 1960s one. But this is all about, you know, reenacting is basically improving and getting better at certain things you do. So I hope this short video was informative and might you get interested in doing Cold War Soviet, but well, I bored you enough already, so thank you for watching. See you guys in the next video.